Hello, Kathy. How are you today?
Doing good, Bob. How are you?
Great. We're here today to ask Kathy Nelson, who is the founder and CEO of KN Utility Telecom Consultants, some questions about a study that she did on behalf of Select Spectrum and our clients, Beach Point Capital and Access Spectrum. I guess, first of all, if you want to briefly cover your qualifications, do you want to describe a little bit about your career?
Sure. I have spent over 32 years in the utility telecommunications industry. I'm an electrical engineer with a professional engineer registration. I worked at Great River Energy for 25 years before going into work for a vendor for a couple of years, went to a larger consulting firm for about 3 years, and then started my own practice about 2.5 years ago. So I've spent a lot of time helping utilities figure out what to do for spectrum, helping utilities figure out what to do for technology. I was on the board of UTC for about 10 years. 3 of those, I chaired public policy division where I did a lot of spectrum advocacy and became a very passionate person about spectrum, and also chaired UTC from 2017 to 2018.
Great. Our goal was to get a fair and balanced kind of a study, and that's exactly what you produced. If you could talk about what the topic for that study was.
Yeah, so you all asked me to investigate what the total cost of ownership and use case environment is for 700 megahertz and private LTE at 900 megahertz. So that is what I investigated, looking at what that cost of ownership is and what use cases can be best serviced on both of those technologies.
Describe a little bit, why would a utility want to build a private network, right? There's public cellular networks out there. Is this an expense that makes sense? It seems that utilities are doing it.
Utilities have owned and operated their own private networks, both wireless and wirelined, since the 60s and 70s, long before there were any wireless networks. Wireless, commercially provided wireless networks are designed for consumers. They're designed for where there are large quantities of people, and they are designed to serve people. They are not designed to be mission critical applications. And while they can provide connectivity for certain applications, they are not best suited for mission critical applications. They don't
Great.
work when there is bad weather, which you are all experiencing right now, and they don't necessarily work when there are disasters
For the and on the consumer side, you're saying those networks
on the
are
consumer
unreliable.
side. Yes.
Okay. That makes sense to me. So, thinking about this, then maybe describe a little bit about the difference in functionality between, um, I'll call it an industrial radio network built, for example, on the upper 700 megahertz A block, and what seems to be a new trend among some utilities of going to private LTE networks, LTE being the 4G standard that is in use in many consumer phones and a precursor of the 5G networks.
So, quite honestly, they both have very good reasons for existing, very good applications that they support, and they serve the private side is really the same. Utilities can send crews to repair that network if there are challenges with it. They can build it as robust and as hardened as they need to build it to make sure that it withstands the disasters that we were previously talking about. Both the 700 megahertz field area network and a private LTE 900 megahertz network can carry applications such as distribution downline devices such as cat bank controllers, voltage regulators, reclosers, things like that. AMI backhaul. Where private LTE comes into play is it can carry more devices, more applications, and more data, assuming that you have the capability from a spectrum perspective to carry those applications. What I would not put on either network would be video. And the other thing that I would be just cautious of is putting all of your AMI 2.0 meters when you have like millions of meters as a utility. You may clog up your network and not be able to have the other applications preventing the benefit that you might have from using a private LTE network.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. I think you said the applications that these networks would support are similar with some additional advantage in the additional capacity that is brought by PLTE. But what about the cost difference? What did you find in this study comparing the cost of industrial radio on 700 megahertz A block versus 900 megahertz PLTE?
Sure. So in the study, we looked at it cost in a couple of different ways. When you take out the cost of the UEs, which are fairly similar for both networks, those end devices cost fairly similar. So the cost of the infrastructure, the cost of the core, and the cost of the spectrum, when those are the three things that you are looking at, then that's where that cost difference shows up significantly. So looking at the CapEx over a 20-year lifespan without the UEs, it's about twice the difference. When you're looking at the OpEx expense, it's about 3 times the difference from a private LTE on 900 megahertz versus 700 megahertz field area network.
So without the UEs, 2 to 3 times more expensive in a private LTE environment versus a 700 megahertz wideband. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, that would be a fair
Okay.
statement, yes.
Okay. So obviously that's significant difference, and utilities, of course, are conscious of their expenditures. Kathy, tell me also, if you would, about what efficiencies and security can be gained in a private network environment versus a public network environment.
Sure. So if you are using a public network, you have a lot of access points that are public facing, that they could potentially be hacked or be accessed by nation states or bad actors that could potentially compromise your network. With a private network, you have the capability of limiting that to a lot lower level. I'm not going to say that you don't have any access points or you don't have any places that it could be infiltrated, but you have a lot more control over that network. From an efficiency standpoint, I think it's really looking at what those use cases are and where it makes the most sense for those use cases to go, if it should be on a public network or a private network.
These days, Kathy, utilities are feeling some pressure from their customers. Customers are seeing some increasing prices, and part of this is being driven by AI, cryptocurrency, other uses that are driving demand from data centers. And so in this time when capital demands are going up, does it make sense for utilities to be considering private networks, or should they be directing all their investment into just creating more generation and transmission?
As utilities are facing increased demands, I think it's more important for them to operate very secure, very reliable networks, because those increased demands mean that they have to operate their networks on a more stringent requirements with less overhead, and they need to make sure that those networks are available. It takes a very long time to build generation. It takes a long time to build transmission. It takes a significant amount of time to build distribution. Utilities don't necessarily have that amount of time to build in order to serve those data centers. By having good, reliable communication networks, it allows them to do grid modernization, which allows them to put additional capabilities into their systems. It allows them to operate their systems more intelligently and be able to react more efficiently and quicker to the needs that their customers are putting them in.
Kathy, as we talk with utilities management, one of the questions that always comes up is what devices support these particular bands and frequencies. So we have a comparison here between 700 and 900 megahertz PLTE. Maybe you can talk about the level of support that each of those different technologies have.
Yeah, so when we talk about 700 megahertz field area networks, we are typically talking about proprietary solutions, which means that you have a smaller ecosystem to choose from and you are typically locked into one provider. However, the providers that are in this space have been in this space for a very long time. They do have a good ecosystem from a standpoint of devices that can go to cabinets on downline to serve downline devices on the distribution grid. Where that ecosystem, I think, becomes a little bit more skewed in the favor of the 900 megahertz LTE environment is that LTE is a standard technology. And there are more manufacturers that are making IoT type of devices or devices that can go into sensors, devices that are smaller, and that have the capability of being used in ways that the 700 megahertz field area networks can't be used. So it really depends on what your use cases are. It depends on what your budget is. It depends on what your end game is. And one of the things that we talked about in the report is the capability of being able to use 700 megahertz spectrum now for a field area network. And then if you have increasing data needs in the future, be able to repurpose that 700 megahertz spectrum for things such as NB-IoT or other applications, other technologies, so that you're not stranding that asset. And so I think that's something that's important to keep in mind. But there is definitely a difference in the ecosystem in what's available, but it doesn't mean that makes 700 megahertz not a good and valid option for utilities to consider.
That makes a lot of sense, and I do think that this is going to be a big year.
I think that that's the value of what this all brings. The more tools that utilities have in their toolbox, the more options they have to select, the better it is for everyone. Because then utilities can make the choices that make the most sense for them versus being forced into it by what they're capable of getting either from the FCC or spectrum owners or from the marketplace. And they can be the ones that are driving what they choose versus it being told what they have to choose.
Okay, Kathy, thank you very much for the work that you've done here and for taking the time to speak with me about it, and look forward to continuing to work with you.
My pleasure, Bob.
All right, take care.